bum bum bottom 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 bum bum doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 bum bum bottom bum bum doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 bum bum bottom bum bum bottom ba da da 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 ba 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 doopy doopy da bum bum ba da.
You are now in session with the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast. I'm Lisa Gullickson.
I'm Brad Gullickson.
And each month we evaluate a different iconic romance within the four-color realm. In this episode, we are fluffing up our throw pillows.
Oh.
I even did the little choppy thing where you chop the middle and you get the two symmetrical fluffs.
I've seen that in movies, but never experienced it in real life, Lisa. Why is that?
Because I think it's like something you do for guests. Like if you're going to use the throw pillow, there's no reason to like have that little choppity in the middle.
Yeah, definitely not for yourself or your husband.
But the reason I'm doing that is this is our very first Creator Corner Love Seat edition. We are celebrating Jonna and the Unpossible Monsters from Oni Press with Chris and Laura Samnee.
What? This is a really special treat that we were not expecting, but are oh so delighted to have it anyway.
I think that the secret, we were right. In the early aughts, the secret is real.
Yeah.
This is something we dreamed about, hoped about, maybe mentioned on the podcast once or twice, but we did not reach out to them.
Nope.
But they reached out to us.
What?
And our dream of having Chris and Laura Samnee talking Jonna with us, like, boom, manifested.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. It's a true delight.
A treat.
I believe this is Laura Samnee's first podcast ever.
Not only do we believe it, but we know it to be true because she told us.
Okay, I was going to be like humble about it, but it's Laura Samnee's first podcast ever, and that feels really special because Jonna and the Unpossible Monsters is a really special comic book, not just to them, but to Brad and Lisa.
I fell in love with Jonna and the Unpossible Monsters because it really is an ode to siblinghood. I myself am a sibling, and I feel like having a sister and two brothers really helps shape me as a person. And a lot of times when you see siblings represented in pop culture, they are at odds with each other. They are bickering and fighting.
It's a lot like the way we talk about relationships in pop culture as well. You know, they get together at the end of the comic or at the end of the storyline, and then the next storyline, they're fighting and on their way to divorce.
Like it's as if there's no story if there is not a conflict between the characters. And I'm not going to say that Jonna and Rainbow don't have their differences.
Right.
But they really, truly love each other and are enriching each other's lives by being able to bounce their ideas off of each other.
And as you'll hear in this conversation with Chris and Laura, that was paramount to why they made this comic book. They wanted to represent siblings in a very powerful, positive way, and they absolutely accomplish it with Jonna and the Impossible Monsters, which we should say right up top, Volume 1 of the paperback is out now. Volume 2 of the paperback is coming out April 6th, and then the 9th issue, which will be the start of the third and possibly final volume of Jonna and the Impossible Monsters.
Never.
That comes out April 20th. But don't worry, we really lean in heavily to Chris and Laura and say, like, we need like a 75-issue epic, people.
We were like passive aggressively pretending like Jonna was never going to end. And I think that if we had said it one more time, it would have breached on like bullying.
Yeah.
We were like bullying them. Like, we need more Jonna and Rainbow stories, please and thank you.
Well, you know, what was interesting is like, you know, Lisa and I have been Chris Samnee fans for a long time. You can
Amazing
go back
artist.
to our best of, I think it was 2020 episode, our best 2020 episode, and we named Firepower like our favorite ongoing comic book of that year. And we love Firepower. We love, you know, his work with Mark Waid doing Captain America, Black Widow, of course, Daredevil. We love the Mighty Thor. And you know, I was curious that he was doing Jonna and the Impossible Monsters with his wife, Laura. But for whatever reason, I was like, oh, it's an all ages comic. Yeah, it's not going to be my thing. And I picked up the first issue. I was like, oh, well, of course, it's a great comic. It's a Chris Samnee comic. And then the second issue happens. And then the third issue happens. And then by like that fourth issue, I was like, is Jonna and the Impossible Monsters my all-time favorite Chris Samnee comic? And I think the answer is yes. And it's because it is this special explosion that comes out of their relationship, out of their family.
The characters of Rainbow and Jonna are inspired by their own two kids. One is the bossy one, and one is the like free spirit kooky one, I guess, which to me guarantees that they have to at least put out a couple more volumes and have a new character, because they do have a third daughter. And as a person who is a third daughter, I do feel entitled to everything that my older siblings get.
Oh my goodness.
But in this conversation, we don't really spoil anything.
No.
We keep it super tight. So if you have not started reading Jonna, you can go ahead and listen to this conversation. You'll still have all of the beautiful surprises from that first volume.
Yeah. And I mean, it was killing us not to talk about the end of issue 8. It was killing us. Lisa went right up to the edge, but she pulled herself back. Yeah, so I think you're totally comfortable to come into this conversation if you have not read these comics. And I know that after this conversation, you will absolutely seek out Jonna comics. They will become your favorite Samnee comics.
So what they're about is two sisters on the other side of a catastrophic global event. This is a post-apocalyptic story. There have been these enormous kaiju popping up all over the globe, fighting each other, causing this devastation. And initially, Rainbow and Jonna are separated. And we start the story with Rainbow trying to find her sister.
Yes, yeah. And then, of course, an apocalyptic quest kind of goes on from there. But again, it is an all-ages comic, and I want to stress that it is all ages. It never feels like it is a kid's comic. It never feels like it is not appropriate for kids. This is one of those rare birds where anyone who likes stories can read it and enjoy it.
Don't mention birds. Chris Samnee is frightened of birds.
I'm sorry. Yes, that is one of the revelations that comes up in this conversation. It is a tease for what you're about to hear, which I think you are going to really enjoy. We talk about everything Jonna related. We talk about why this comic had to be their first collaboration as a creative couple. They were so kind. They were so generous. I think you're going to have a lot of fun with this conversation.
We know that we did. And we even needled them for tips about being a creative couple. And it turns out you just have to be a cooler person than us.
Yeah. That's the trick. Lisa. So without any further comment, here are Chris and Laura Samnee. Chris and Laura, thank you so much for joining us at Comic Book Couples Counseling. It is a true pleasure to have you here in our love nest.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it.
Lisa and I, we of course reread Jonna and the Impossible Monsters before having this conversation with you. And we were talking about how over the course of its first few issues, we really folded that comic into our hearts. It's become one of our heart comics.
We love it so much.
Adore it.
Thank you.
And we're kind of just, I think where we wanted to start this conversation is with what about this particular story made it necessary for you both to collaborate on?
You want to take this one?
Well,
you can be honest.
Yeah, that wasn't really the intention. I've always been the person in the background. So really it was Chris had come up with the idea by himself, and he was at the stage where he was pitching it. And because I'm the behind the scenes person, I was, typing up the pitch for him. And we got to the point where he needed to kind of flesh it out to, make it a real pitch. He was asked for a more fleshed out version of it. And so as I was typing it with him, my ideas kind of started popping in there. And, it was just going to be me throwing ideas out there until I kind of thought if I wasn't married to him, I would deserve the credit as a co-writer. That just because we're married doesn't mean that, my ideas weren't to be acknowledged too. So as we started working on it, it just kind of happened naturally where I just came on as co-writer. So really,
you kept taking more and more. I kept stealing more of your ideas.
Well,
things like it just kind of grew into our book. It started out as just like my idea, and the more that we collaborated, the more obviously it wasn't just a one-person job anymore. We were doing it together. And I was like, well, you've already been the brains of the operation with everything else. Let's just make it official and you're co-writer.
Well, and normally I'm there to fix grammatical mistakes and, do that kind of stuff. And it became obvious that it was beyond just me, correcting a few things here or there. And it became more, my ideas getting incorporated into the pitch. And at that point, it just kind of felt like it would be fun.
The first volume you dedicated to your 3 daughters. And I've read that your daughters very much inspired at least the need for this story. And I was wondering, when you were coming up with a story with your daughters in mind, how did that change the creative process?
That's a good question.
Well, I think I'm going to try not to talk every time. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
This is our dynamic, is that I'm the speaker and he's the quiet presence in the background. So I'll let Chris answer when he...
At least you have one quiet presence. In our relationship, there is none.
Well, sometimes it means I'm speaking over him. So, interject if you need to, Chris. But I think really the characters felt more inspired by our daughters, our oldest 2. And I think that's really where the idea came from, in terms of how they, the creative process and all that. I think that just having kids that we can kind of, keep in mind when we're writing or when Chris is drawing, has been really helpful.
Well, and we've showed them layouts of a page, and we're making sure that kids are able to translate what's going on the page, the flow of it. If I'm doing panels that are a little cockeyed, I want to make sure that their eye is going left to right and it's reading the right way and it's not something confusing for them. But also, I just wanted to make something that they could enjoy. And there are a lot of middle grade books, but not by us. And I've seen a lot of them come into the house and they all really enjoy them. But there's very few books that I've been able to share with them. Mm-hmm. I'm always working around them, but I'm not like, hey, here's a book that I did. You can read it.
Yeah, I think there was, part of the idea was that all of Chris's work until this point hadn't really been kid friendly. And a lot of it's not, it's not inappropriate or anything. It's just our kids aren't going to sit down and read 35 issues of Daredevil when they're 6 years old. So I think that it was also the idea that they see Dad working all the time, and now they can actually read that work themselves, as opposed to, us going, well, it's not really for you.
Yeah. And then when we get comps and they come into the house, it's an exciting thing. Instead of oh, here's a box of comic, I'm just going to go put it down.
Yeah. It really
here's one for you and one for you.
It really kind of solidified what he does for them, where it was just kind of this idea before. And now they actually get it. They watch him make it. They are part of the process, and that they see pages before they go to print, and then they get to enjoy the finished product also. And
they see us working at the kitchen table, writing together. And then,
Yeah, they've gotten an inside view of comics here over the last couple of years.
So much so, I think our middle wants to do it.
Yeah. I think,
that's so cool.
I think we've got one that's been bit by the bug.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. What does all ages, that term, mean to you? Because I feel like in comic books and books in particular, in the publishing world, it is so much more than it's MPAA appropriate for a child. I really do think that there's a point of view with all ages books.
Well, we originally pitched it as an all ages with big quotes around it, because I wanted it to be the kind of thing that everyone could enjoy, whether it's a little bitty kid or, an older reader. I wanted everyone to be able to read it, but they've wanted us to sort of focus in on middle grade. But I want to be, the comic book equivalent of Studio Ghibli or Pixar, just something for literally everyone, literally all ages.
Well, and I think it was also kind of important too that it was something that adults were going to enjoy with a child in their life. instead of, just pass there. I mean, we buy a ton of, kids comics here, and most of them we just hand over to the kids and say, enjoy. But the idea that you can also share that comic book reading experience with a kid was really important to us, and the adults were going to enjoy it as well.
Yeah, I mean, Lisa and I, we're a child-free couple, but Jonna absolutely speaks to us. I mean, and I think like it's easy to sell to people who don't have kids because it's Chris Samnee drawing monsters. Who doesn't want to see that?
Chris wanted to do that. That was part of the reason behind the book too, is that there was a need to draw some monsters that hadn't been met yet.
Yeah, I mean, I started out, I always wanted to draw superhero books when I was a kid, and then for whatever reason, I was drawing like noir when I started my career, and I was like Capote in Kansas, and then I went and did Area 10, and it was like dark, black and white. And I was like, well, this isn't really what I set out to do. And I finally got to do superhero stuff, but then I was like, well, I want to do like, nobody knows that I want to draw monsters. Nobody knows like why I want to draw more than me.
Yeah.
So this is my chance to finally just do whatever I wanted to do. And it's like rocks and monsters and punching, just, go for it.
Yeah.
What I love about Jonna is that it's a story about siblings. And Brad is an only child, and the world has revolved around him since he was born.
It's been great.
I'm a third of 4. So I always like gravitate towards sibling stories and something that like accurately depicts that experience. And what I love about this story is that by Rainbow and Jonna not being like blood relatives, it shows that like family and siblinghood in particular is something that is greater than like DNA or just like consequence, like that there is like a commitment involved. And I was wondering how you kind of worked out their sibling dynamic.
Well, I mean, I think family finds each other instead of, it doesn't have to be birth to be, it doesn't have to be like blood to be family. And I mean, that's really at the heart of it.
Again, this is also really inspired by our kids' relationships with each other. Our kids are 4 years apart from the oldest to the youngest. So they were all close together. Over the last few years, they've had a lot of time together, but they've had a lot of time together anyways. And they just have a really close bond where, there's squabbles and there's stuff like that, but they're each other's biggest supporters. They encourage each other. And, I personally thought it was important to see that kind of sibling bond in, media, because so often it's siblings who fight. And I think that, we imitate the things that we see around us, and that a loving, committed sibling relationship is something that is work. It is, it doesn't always happen naturally. And I really like the idea of them just kind of loving on each other and being close. Obviously there's conflict from time to time, but that really was inspired by our kids. Our kids are really close to each other, and they take care of each other really well. And so that was kind of something we wanted to see portrayed.
And it's fun to draw too, just like kids supporting each other. Like in 10 that I'm working on right now, there's just one panel where Rainbow says, "Way to go, you." And it's fun to do stuff like that. I mean, I like drawing dark stuff too, but every once in a while, this is a nice change of pace.
Yeah, I like the idea of, as a parent, having kids who get along is a wonderful gift. And I just, wanted to see some of that reflected back in Rainbow and Jonna's relationship.
One of my favorite scenes from the first volume is when Jonna just squishes 2 bugs without thinking about it. Like she just has this violent urge and she's just expressing it. And then Rainbow says, like, why would you do that? Like in the context of the monsters, we are bugs. And what I loved about that scene is that when you have a sibling, there's always like this other perspective that you have to reckon with. And especially with the dad being missing and there isn't like that parental element, they are really teaching each other. And is that something you see? Do you ever just spot your kids like really giving each other some perspective and teaching each other lessons?
Well, our oldest she's 10 and a half. And if you asked her, she thinks she's the third parent in this house. So that is a dynamic that we see with Chris and I are both youngest of two. So we weren't familiar with the oldest child before having our own, oldest child. And there is a lot of that kind of responsibility for your younger siblings and for, just the idea that you might know better than they do. You might be in charge, even if you're not really. You might feel like you're in charge. And I know, at least in our house, that definitely that dynamic is there, where our oldest feels like I don't want to say bosses the other ones around, because she doesn't, but
she likes to feel like she's in charge.
Yeah.
Oh, Mom and Dad went upstairs. I'm in charge now.
Yeah, I mean, it's, she definitely thinks of herself as, mostly adult.
What is hilarious about that is I'm like I said, 3 to 4, and my oldest sister now resents us for making her be the parent so young. And we're like, we're pretty sure you volunteered. We're like,
well, I was going to say, we definitely have never put her in that role. But she's not that much older than the other two, but she definitely, puts herself in that role sometimes.
The story sort of like switchbacks on itself at a few key points. And how did you come to shaping the structure of the story and specifically in how it relates to that relationship with the dad?
Well, I wanted to make sure that it was still their story. Just like the through line is just the two of them, and they're meeting their dad again is their goal. And I didn't want him to take over a giant part in the story, because I just wanted it to be from a kid's perspective from beginning to end. So we do have adults show up, but they're secondary.
Well, but I think we also wanted to remind readers that this relationship is, what they're missing, that without seeing some of that interaction with their father, what's their, of course, every child's motivation would be to be reunited with their parents, but we thought it was important to see some of that relationship so you can understand why they are fighting so hard to get back to him.
And what was the impetus of giving them Gore and Nomi?
I think Chris just wanted to draw them.
I thought somebody that looked like they had a helicopter blade on their arm would be cool. And Gore, I thought, would be like, I wanted to have a giant 80s action hero in the book. And he's my Kurt Russell. And I was thinking, like, if a person who, unlike Jonna, like, is powerless, how would they go up against monsters? How would they fight them? And they would probably get pretty beat up. And so if in my sketchbook, you can actually see the rest of the scars, but he only has one that goes through his face, but it's like a monster's claw goes through the rest of his body. So his trunk has a giant scar across it too. He's really he's beat up.
Well, and I think also, like, having adult characters in an all ages book where adults are reading it is also, just kind of a point of reference.
Look, we did this for you too.
Yeah. Well, but it's not totally it's obviously totally fantasy, but there's also this idea of, if these kids are moving through this world by themselves, surely there are adults around. And what would those adults' reactions be to what's going on, to seeing these kids on their own? And just kind of having that, that idea that, everyone's children belong to everyone. There's no such thing as, someone else's child. That if you're an adult in the capacity to help a child, you should be doing it. And I think that kind of played it, besides wanting to draw helicopter arms and, and scarred faces.
The way I see them fitting into, like, the theme of family is like that one scene where Gore does something that to Nomi is reckless. And they've built this whole community around themselves, but she still says to him, like, how dare you risk leaving me alone? Like, you can be in a group, and if you don't have your family person there, you are still somehow alone. And that's why we have that, like, kind of seeking thing to create and reunite with that family feeling.
Well, and they've all experienced loss. Their whole world has been removed from them. So in that case, all you have is your person or your people around you.
And that's the whole point of the campfire scene in Volume 1, where it's just like everybody has their own little groups, but everybody is together. And everybody has their own story of loss, but they all come together, to help each other.
right now we're being very good about not being spoilery, even though I have like so many questions. But like we're getting towards learning Jonna's origins, but I still have a lot of questions about like Rainbow's origins and her dad's origins and where did their familyhood come from? Are we going to get any are we moving towards getting more answers?
Lisa can feel the 12-issue deadline hitting.
There are some answers coming. There are also some things left open to your interpretation.
And I think that's something that we've relied on a lot too, is leaving things open to interpretation. Neither of us are a fan of like spelling out, every detail behind something. That we really do like people being able to see themselves, which, the more you explain something, sometimes the less accessible it becomes. And, so I think that some of those might be mysteries to answer in another series.
I hope so. I really would like a 13, a 14, a Jonna number 50 and beyond. Going back to your comment about dealing with loss and how everyone around that campfire is, going through their own traumatic experience. I think that's one of the reasons why this book hit me so hard at this particular point in time with everything that's going on in the world, to read Jonna and see how all these different perspectives are dealing with something as dramatic as kaiju, was very relatable. And I'm wondering what it's like for you two as creators to work through this fictional event while the world is the way the world is.
Well, we started before all this came into place, but really it's kind of strange how a lot of the things that happen in the book, we can look in the real world now and see very similar circumstances. I think that when we started this, Chris has been at this since like 2014. And obviously the world has changed in so many ways in just that short period of time.
Yeah.
And, the bulk of it was kind of set to paper before many of the current events that, I think might run parallel to some of the things going on in the book. And it just, it's I don't even know how to.
Well, I was just trying to make it so I didn't have to draw a whole bunch of right angles. And I was like, well, why don't we just make it like post-apocalyptic? I like Akira. I like, all these other things, I like Mad Max. Why don't we just make everything beat up so I don't have to get a ruler out? And then it's like, oh, whoops.
Yeah.
There's so many parallels now that it feels almost like I had some sort of intuition, but I obviously don't.
Or that we were maybe even trying to make a statement about something that wasn't originally there. Of course, now you see the parallels, and I feel like there's a hopeful message through what we're doing, and I think that that's important. In this day and age, that when I read the news stories about things that are going on, especially in Ukraine right now, I think it's important to balance that with the hopeful parts of what's going on too, and that how humanity really can be a tool for good when it's used that way, in reaction to things that are happening. So I like to think that we at least have echoed that part of real world events too.
Well, Lisa and I talk about on this podcast all the time, when we read a comic or we watch a movie or read a book, it's really about finding ourselves in those stories and then pulling us out of the work. And I guess what I really want to explore is, what is it like for you in the creation process? How do you find yourself in the worlds, in the characters that you're creating?
Well, I think for this one, having it centered around kids that are inspired by, our kids has certainly allowed us to approach it from, we see how they operate, how we operate as parents, and, put some of those motivations into there.
Well, and all of the monsters and all of the weird stuff that's in there is things that bothered me as a kid. So there's all the sticky stuff. That's because I don't like all the sticky gloopy stuff. I grew up in a log cabin, and my parents had tons of different animals and stuff. And there was pheasants and quail and rats and pigeons, ducks and geese. And there's all this gross business that I just did not like. There's the first animal that shows up is kind of like a chicken and kind of like a hawk, but it's like deformed and red and giant kaiju. It's because I grew up hating birds. My dad was a falconer. And I did not like birds around. I didn't like birds around.
So like Chris everything is processing his childhood trauma through the monsters in the book.
The whole thing is just my own therapy on paper. So like I thought eggs were really gross. So like they're headed towards this giant gross egg. All of it is just like, it's all stuff that I was just like, oh. No, and now I'm processing all of it.
Yeah.
How has it been for you guys to like work together as a creative couple? Because Brad and I, we now do this podcast together as a creative couple. And it just turns out that if one of us is crying, usually me, it's because of something relating to this thing that we're making. You know what I mean? Where it's like when you collaborate with coworkers, it's like one thing. Then you collaborate with your partner and you go like, well, I can hurt this person's feelings because they love me.
And the thing that we're creating is like we love it so much and we want it to be perfect. And then we have to fight each other over it.
Yeah.
We've had a few.
Yeah. There've been a few. Yeah. I think it helps that our relationship has always been coworkers. We met working at a bookstore together.
Oh, we did too.
Cool.
Barnes and Noble.
Oh, we were at Borders.
Hey! The enemy.
So, I do think it helps that we've always had this dynamic where we were working together. And then once Chris quit the bookstore, I took on the role of, the invoicing, the bookkeeping, all of that stuff that artists, no offense, are typically not very skilled at. And then
it's just my brain.
Yeah, I know it's your brain. And then we got to the point where I could quit my job and just take over full time as that part of the business, the art sales and all that. So we've always had, a dynamic where we were working towards the same goals for things. And generally I get my way if there's some sort of discussion just because I tend to have a more assertive personality. But the opposite of that tended to be true on Jonna. And that's that since this originally started as Chris's vision and his project, when it came down to it, if I felt like I had to fight, we went with his vision of it. Most of the time, there have been a few things that I got in there, but I just wanted to make sure that, this was staying true to something he really wanted to spend his time on and do. And so there's been some conflict, but I like to think it's the conflict that, creates a better story or creates a better book at the end.
We're both fighting for the same thing. It's not like do this because I want you to do it. It's like, well, we have to do this to make the book better.
Yeah.
So that,
well, and also
to push it forward.
Also, I think it's really nice having a collaborator because sometimes, bouncing ideas off of another person leads you to a better idea. And, I think we saw that starting with the pitch was that, throwing my ideas in there allowed us to kind of move things forward in a different way than if it had just all been Chris.
Well, and when we were pitching it, you were like, do you think you have enough for a whole story? And I said, yeah, I think I do. I think I got it all figured out. And then we sat down to type it and I was like, I got this whole first issue really locked in.
First issue's good.
But
so yeah, I think that, the conflict that's there is generally productive conflict. We don't really, I think that we do also, because there's a different dynamic in a marriage. I do say things to Chris that I would never say in a professional setting.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't, because he's really kind about everything, but I tend to be a little bit more, I don't know.
I don't want to say bossy. What
would be the word? But assertive. Isn't that what assertive? But, I think that in this case, it's mostly worked out. We've also, known each other for almost 20 years. So we've had time to work out, how we do things. And really, Jonna just kind of became an extension of what we were already, how we were already working together.
Have you found that you've had to create boundaries around when you are working and when you are not working? Or is it just kind of a fluid kind of environment?
I mean, boundaries, honestly, mostly are just with the kids. I mean, we had the whole outline figured out way in the past. We have to work on script before the issues are done. We have to finalize scripts together, and we do that over a weekend. Yeah. But for the most part, like, I go to the office and I work, and then I show her pages before I send everything in.
Well, but also the pandemic has really changed that too, because, right. Chris was actually, he had office space outside the house before the pandemic. And we decided to work completely out of our home once that hit. So we've also had kids that have been doing virtual school and homeschooling during that time. So home has really been work/school/home/ where we are almost all the time. So in that sense, sometimes we will have to kind of, put work away for the day, because when you work from home, it can always feel like you're working, and it can also feel like you're never leaving home. So, I think that we've had to kind of, Chris is really good about, going to his office and getting work done. But, sometimes it'll be like, all right, kids, we have to talk about work right now. And, again, our kids think that they're also making the book. So sometimes we'll have to be like, not right now. This is not a place for you right now.
What if they do this? No, that one's done.
No, we're done with that. So yeah, I do think that the boundaries over the last couple of years have been maybe a little more fluid than is healthy, to be totally honest. But we're kind of working with where we are right now, and at some point they'll go back to normal. But yeah, it can be hard to work from home and home from work.
But I get a little hopeless now sometimes, which is I never had when I had to leave the house.
That's
for
true.
it.
I would imagine that, Jonna being this family book elevates it in your own personal imaginations to something incredibly special and separate from the other comics work you've done, Chris. I mean,
yeah.
Like, what is it like to then go on to something else and put this aside? Or like, do you feel the pull to Jonna?
Like we do, and we want you to put everything else down.
Yes, yes.
It's tough to bounce back and forth. Sometimes it takes me half a day to switch gears because I'll work on Firepower for 2-3 weeks in a row before I jump back and do Jonna. And sometimes it's like I get in a certain mode and I have to kind of switch out of it. But once I start on one book and get into the groove, then I'm kind of in. It's the switch back and forth that's the hardest.
Well,
and I try not to think about Jonna too much while I'm doing Firepower, because it'll get my gears all mixed up again. I can't focus on too many things at once, just in general. But while I'm working on a book, it makes it even harder.
Well, and I think it's also kind of nice too to have something like Firepower that doesn't require as much of your
mental space.
Yeah, your mental. Yeah. I mean, you can, Robert gives you full scripts and you're working in a way that doesn't tax you as much. Like it is challenging to write and draw your own book.
And I'm second guessing myself every time I'm doing something on Jonna. Like, is this the right panel to do next? Is it? Because we're talking about it and I'm thinking about it. But with Firepower, once it's turned in and it's approved, then I sync it. And I don't have to think about it anymore because the story is written and that's out of my hands. Like, I don't have to worry about that part. All I have to worry about is making it look good.
Yeah. It is kind of nice to have something to go to that isn't as hard on you.
Yeah, it's what I think about when I'm doing dishes. It's what I think about like all the time.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to turn the brain off.
Yeah. Laura, do you have the bug now? Like, are you guys, would you like to work on more stories or collaborate on more stories?
Well, I'm going to say that maybe. I think the answer changes depending on where our kids are at. When Chris and I met, I was actually an aspiring screenwriter. And we put together a pitch for a book and it went nowhere, 19 years ago or whatever. So I think in the back of my head, this has always been kind of like, well, maybe one day I'll get back to writing. And having the kids at home for the last couple of years, it's been really challenging to have, because I already run the business side of things. So I already have a full-time job and then I have the kids full-time. And then this, writing on top of it.
And putting up with me.
There's a lot of, it's been a lot of work. And as our kids go back to school, and they're 6, 8, and 10. So 3 years when we started this, we still had essentially a toddler, and as they get older and grow more independent, and they don't require as much, physical care during the day, there certainly is a space in my head that opens up to be creative and to dream of, what I would like to do. We've thrown around a lot of ideas over the last 20 years, and there's a few that I still keep notebooks on. And I think, well, if Chris has time to draw this one day, maybe. So I'm not going to say never, but I won't do it during another pandemic.
Oh, please. Yeah. I hope that's also true.
I hope this is the one and only pandemic I have to work through.
Yes, please. But it also sounds to me that you do imagine a future beyond 12 issues with Jonna. Like you see a future for Jonna and Rainbow.
Well, I think that there's things to explore still. I don't know if I don't, beyond that, I don't know. I don't know if, right now, if we have the energy for it, to be honest. And it's the kind of thing that requires a lot of energy. But, I think Chris definitely has
ideas,
a bunch of backstory and ideas and all of that. So,
but I just want to get this one done first. I mean,
it's hard to think about the next thing when you're still in the current thing.
Yeah. And I'm doing 2 current things, which I have done in the past, but not to this extent. Firepower is the longest project I've ever done. And I'm doing it in addition to Jonna, which is 2 long-term projects. And most of the time it was like, I'll start on Thor and I'll do 4 issues of this. And then I'm working on Daredevil and I'll do 4 or 6 issues of something else. And this is, a lot more than that.
2 long-term things at the same time.
I mean, frankly, as a fan of your work, it was kind of shocking to learn it was going to happen at all. But then my understanding of the way you had to build up to Firepower is you had a pretty big leeway. I don't know if there's still a leeway there.
The gap is getting smaller by the month.
Yeah, there was quite a cushion at the beginning, and there was a cushion with Jonna too. Unfortunately, the negative impacts of the pandemic on, our workday have kind of negated a lot of that too.
Before we had kids, I could work, 20 hours a day and just drink a bunch of coffee and sleep 4 hours and not have to worry about anything. I just keep plowing through.
Yeah.
And that's just not the reality we live in anymore.
No.
It
turns out it's a lot of work to have these kids too. That is also a full-time job.
Who'd have thunk?
Just the dishes and the laundry are a full-time job sometimes.
We have never met parents who made it look easy to us.
It's not. Don't be fooled by anyone who says it's easy. It's not. But yeah, to keep bringing it back to the pandemic, which just really altered everyone's lives, obviously. But, when you work from home and suddenly everything's at home, you're just not seeing the same kind of, Chris isn't at the table for the same amount of time that he used to be uninterrupted.
Yeah, even days off aren't days off. I got 3 or 4 hours that I'm still going to work tonight once I get the kids in bed. This is the day off, but still stuff has to get done.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you coming on and chatting on your day off, Chris, and keeping the kids entertained with a movie while you're zooming with Comic Book Couples Counseling.
We'll tell the Patreon members which movie it was. It was okay. I'm joking mostly.
That's the exclusive content.
That's right.
That's right. So we do have a few questions from some listeners that they would like to ask you if you're okay with that.
Sure.
Elliot from @Elliot Comic Art, his questions are for you both. What about the creative process was easier and more challenging than when working with your partner?
Well, we're always together, so finding the time to talk about work is pretty easy, I would say. And we know each other really well, so that also is pretty easy. I do think that work conflict and home conflict can kind of, feed into each other a little bit. So if I'm already upset about something else, it's probably not the best time to, get some work done. What would you say? What's the easiest part about about working with your partner, Chris?
I mean, we always work together.
Yeah.
So like, I don't send an email without saying, "Hey, does this sound okay?" You know, like, and that might be, you know.
Well, not every email. You send the ones that are important.
Emails.
Yeah, important emails.
We understand. We're very much like that.
Yeah. It's helpful to have someone to bounce your words off of first.
So, I mean, that's just naturally what we do. And it's like, does this page look okay? Does this make sense? Does this dialogue make sense? And it's easy just because it's already what I do. You know, she's my conscience. She's, you know, like my second set of eyes. She's everything.
Stop. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes the harder parts are harder because, you know, you're emotionally invested with the person as well as with the work. But the easy parts are, I mean, you know, 20 years in, we have a pretty good
shorthand.
Yeah. We have a pretty good way of communicating and, you know, working with each other. And whether it's about who, you know, the dishes that need to get done or the kid's doctor's appointment or, you know, page 10 of, you know, Jonna number 9, it all kind of just is the same type of thing for us.
Well, and, you know, we have an easy back and forth. We know what we're headed towards with the book. And, you know, I feel like you and I work just as easily together as like Mark and I after 3 years. You know, like we're always on the same page and we were heading towards the end point and that's why it worked so well. And you and I worked so well because we've been working together longer than Mark Wade and I.
Decades. Decades.
Yeah.
Right. This is a question from Macau Milan. And did you create this world with other media in mind? Animation, game, live action, big dreams?
No. I wouldn't be opposed to something like that, but the whole point of this was to make it what I wanted to draw and not have to think about any of that other stuff. Because like I feel like the best comics are intended just to be comic books. Mm-hmm. And I put all of that stuff out of my mind when I was drawing it, or when I was coming up with it. Because I don't know that Jonna would work in live action. I think it might look weird to have a real kid, you know, in just torn up clothes going around punching monsters. Like maybe it'd be cool. Maybe it wouldn't. I don't know.
But I think you also wanted to stay true to what you wanted to do as opposed to start, you know, how is this marketable as you know, as an animated, you know, show? Or I think once you start thinking through what other people will think, you lose track of what you think yourself. And I think that Chris, it was important to us that this be his vision and we're not introducing other opinions into it or other goals into it other than to just tell a really good story through comics.
And if other stuff comes of it, great. But the whole point was to make it a comic book, just a comic book. And that's why the 2-page spreads there are so many, because I like big 2-page spreads and I don't like digital. Sorry. I don't really like reading comics on an iPad and on a big computer. Even it's like, I need the tactile holding a page. When you open up a 2-page spread, that I want it to feel big, and you don't really get that in movies or TV shows or anything. I wanted that impact. I feel like is in your hands, and that's exciting to me.
That is something we notice in reading the comic book, because we've read Jonna in all of the forms available. We have read it as single issues, we have read it as a trade paperback, and we've read it in digital. And you really have mastered the page turn where you do get that big pow of the 2-page spread and the single issue, like the ability to lay on your belly and lay it out flat is like, it's just the best way to read Jonna. I think it's just like I get that. Like, this is a flat comic vibe.
I mean, I like the trade paperback. I love the paper quality that's on that trade paperback, but yeah, being able to put a splash flat on a table there's nothing better.
And that's how I read comics when I was a kid. I would lay on my stomach on a pillow from my bed, getting it all dirty or whatever, and lay it flat on the floor. And that's the kind of comic I wanted to make, where, you know, our kids do the same thing. They lay all their comics on the floor and read over it. And opening up a page in your face, it's big. It feels
Well,
like a moment.
There was also some discussion about the best way to publish the book and whether it should be done as volumes. And Chris really wanted, floppies. He really wanted that experience as part of it. And that's something that, Oni was, really on board with and was important.
Thankfully,
yeah.
It has to be singles. That's how I grew up reading comics. That's how I think of them. And the collections are great, but it always has to start at, the 22 pager.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or 28 or
26.
whatever.
Oh man. So this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you for taking the time and chatting with us even longer than we initially planned. Thank you to you both so much. You've got Jonna and the Unpossible Monsters out there in the world right now. It's a product of your children as much as it is anything else. How do they see their role in your creation process of this comic book? Like when those comps come in, do they feel like that ownership, like you're saying, like this is my comic book too?
Our 8-year-old definitely.
Our middle daughter she's like number one Jonna fan. I mean, well,
the questionnaires for school, it's like, what's your favorite book? Jonna. if you could make a toy, what would it be? Jonna. If you could go anywhere, where would it be?
Yeah,
the North Pole.
I think she also, identifies with a character that was based on her, to be honest. I think she sees a lot of herself in the book, which helps. But I do think, I think they're proud of it. I don't know how much they identify it as theirs, but I do think that they're very proud of the book. I think they're proud of, the roles that they've played in inspiring the characters. And, I don't know, I think you've got our 8-year-old spotting blacks every once in a while, or filling blacks. But yeah, it does feel like a family project. And I think they relate to that in that way. And they have a lot of pride that, they're huge readers and they love to read comics. And I think that they feel really proud that they can show it off to their friends or, we have copies at the library at school and, stuff like that where they have a little bit of ownership of it and they have a lot of pride. And that's been cool.
I just wonder what it's like, with you, Chris, working out your fears over chickens and, birds. If your kids are going to have nightmares about filling blacks.
Maybe. You never know how you're damaging your kids until they grow up and tell you. So we'll wait and see on that one, I guess.
Oh, my goodness. Lisa, do you have any last minute questions?
No, I just want to bid for like 12 issues. Not enough. A lot of questions.
Yeah, same. And for our listeners, where can they find you online? I'll have links in all the show notes, but just in case they don't look at my show notes, where can they find you and continue this conversation?
I'm at Chris Samnee on Instagram, at Chris Samnee on Twitter, no underscores. I don't have anything else online anymore. There used to be like DeviantArt and my website and all that stuff, but we don't really do
please don't go to the website. It hasn't been updated since our third child was born. Please don't go to the website.
Got it.
But yeah, I'm besides Jonna, I'm doing Firepower monthly for Skybound/Image. And that's it. Laura?
I'm like really super private on Twitter. So
you're on Instagram.
I have 2 Instagrams. I have a private one, which I've had for like a decade. And then I started a comic book one, which has one sole image on it. So I don't know. I've dipped my toe in that water and then I quickly took it out and then I dipped my toe back in and now I'm just going to leave it there and see what happens. But my Instagram is Laura_Samnee. That's the public one. So if you are into...
There's just one image there for bait.
If you are into someone who never, ever posts anything, I have the account for you.
A low commitment account.
That's right. I will not fill your feed with anything. Don't worry about it.
Well, thank you so much. We will give you one like on that one photo and then we'll get out of Dodge.
Oh, we have 3 accounts. We can be a little bit more generous than 1 like.
3 likes. We got
3 likes for you.
3 likes to give.
Thank you.
But again, thank you for joining Comic Book Couples Counseling.
All right. Thank you so much.
Having us. It was exciting to be the first couple.
Yes. I know, this is so rad.
we didn't even talk about it, but like, this is something that we've been anticipating for a long time. And when the two of you reached out to us, like we were literally like working up the courage of messaging you.
We have like our dream list of people to be on, and then and you guys were on the top of that list.
Lisa was making lunch when the message came in, and I went like, "Oh shit, Lisa!"
So we, if you want to hear us gush uncontrollably, which I know you don't like sticky stuff. I just got gross, but you should listen to the intro because we love you guys so much, and we want to get into but we don't want to make you feel embarrassed.
So we don't do that in front of you.
but as soon as you guys leave, things get really sticky. Gross.
On that note, Lisa,
you're welcome.
I'm going to say goodbye to them one more time.
Okay.
Chris and Laura, thank you.
Well, thank you for having us, and thank you for being so supportive of Jonna.
Oh, of course.
We love it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right, thank you, guys.
Take care.
Oh gosh, Lisa, did you know they were a Borders couple? I wish we had known that beforehand.
Oh, are you disgusted? I always thought that the kids who worked at Borders were so much hipper than we were.
Well,
that Barnes and Noble were the real nerdy kids, and then if you wanted to wear jeans, you worked at Borders.
That is true. I mean, Lisa knows this, but the reason I applied originally to Barnes and Noble is because I loved Borders books so much, and I just assumed that wherever I was going to end up working, I would grow to hate it. And so I didn't want to work at Borders, so I chose Barnes & Noble. And little did I know how much I would end up loving working at Barnes & Noble. And also, I met Lisa there.
That's
Best
right.
decision I ever made in my entire life. Also, Barnes & Noble, still around for now. Borders, long gone.
I think that adds to Borders' hipness, though. It adds to their mystique. Of the two corporate entities, clearly they were cooler and too good for this world.
Yeah, and once they went away, Barnes & Noble was like, you can wear jeans now,
yeah, I know. The employees nowadays, they have it so easy.
Yeah. And then I left and I didn't get to wear jeans. I never got jeans at work.
But we're wearing jeans now, though.
Yeah.
So I think, Brad, I think we can say that we kept it pretty cool for 99.999% of this interview. And then at the end, I decided to just get really weird.
I mean, you got a little weird. I don't know. I thought you were great in the conversation. I loved your point of view on it, as always. I thought it led to some really interesting avenues. I was crazy nervous during the entire chat. And as you can hear in some of my conversations, it took me a long time to speak around some of those questions. But
I thought you did great.
Well, thank you.
I don't think anybody... I don't think anybody could tell that you were nervous.
Well, I hope that is the case. And even if it's not the case, it's just how I was. It was really cool to talk to the Samnees about Jonna and the Impossible Monsters, one of our favorite comic books out there right now.
I hope I didn't make Chris feel like I don't love firepower, because I do.
Yeah.
It's also great.
Yeah. Well,
that Kirkman guy is going places.
Why do you think you made him feel bad about firepower?
Because we kept on going on just put down whatever else you're working on.
Yeah, you told him to quit firepower to do more Jonna. And that's just that's just our hearts.
It's a matter of priorities.
Yeah, all right. So that's going to do it. I hope you had a great time. Please let us know. Tweet at us at CBCC Podcast.
Thank you for your questions, by the way.
Yes. Thank you for the questions. We may incorporate more questions into our episodes.
Yeah.
Who knows? If you did like this, though, please share this episode with your friends, your family, your coworkers. This is a big deal. We've gotten so many great guests on Comic Book Couples Counseling. We have more great guests coming, already loaded up. You can find links in the show notes to our conversation with Nick Dragata and Caleb Goldner talking about their new comic from Image, Ghost Cage #1. It is a really rad chat. And of course, we have, in the very near future, a conversation with Rance Hosley talking about the Tori Amos anthology, Little Earthquakes. And Lisa, Oni Press is back. We're chatting Orcs in Space with Michael Tanner and Francois Vigneault.
Another great hyper-violent book for all ages.
I mean, we get into it with Michael and Francois. Orcs in Space, I do think of Orcs in Space as an all-ages comic, but when you look at it, there is a lot of gore, some brains, some corpses of mice.
I know 8-year-olds professionally, not
Right?
But if there's anybody loves a
because you're a
corpse-
teacher, Lisa. You know them professionally as a teacher.
Yeah, I didn't mean like on the streets. But like kids love and are curious about hyperviolence. And I think that a comic book is a really safe space to explore mortality.
Yeah. Orcs in Space, pick it up. Also, on the main feed, we are still talking Marco and Alana as seen in Fiona Staples and Brian K. Vaughan's saga. We just wrapped up trade paperback 6 and 7, and our next episode right here in the main feed will be on trade paperback volume 8, building towards volume 9, which is the climax that Lisa doesn't know about. Well, kinda, she sorta knows about it.
For me, having the big thing spoiled has not at all ruined my reading experience. I mean, I have been in it with Saga. I'm like fully emotionally on the ride, even though I know that things get sad.
Yeah, and you don't know the details of that big sad thing, and also you have many little sad things to look forward to.
I'm kind of excited that there's going to be a point where Brad stops lording over me, that he's ahead of me in Saga.
Just 2 weeks to go, Lisa, and you'll be all caught up. Because when we cover paperback number 9, we'll also cover the most recent Saga issues that have dropped. And there's so much to talk about there, especially relationship-wise. So there you have it.
But before we end, I think we should mention one more thing. Mm-hmm. Despite Brad and Chris and Laura's terrible example that worked out okay, if you work at a bookstore, don't be hitting on your coworkers. It's inappropriate.
Yeah, Lisa and I do also have very bad versions of what ultimately became a really beautiful thing. But don't
hit on your coworkers.
Unless you're really sure.
No, Brad, never. You should never hit on your coworkers.
Got it.
Unless, of course, your coworker is your wife.
Okay.
Or your spouse.
Okay. All right. I think I understand now, Lisa. So one last time, Jonna and the Unpossible Monsters trade paperback volume 1 is out now. Volume 2 will be out April 6th. And issue 9 of Jonna and the Impossible Monsters will be out April 20th.
Okay, Brad, I'm ready to have some tummy time with our single issues.
Oh, yeah.
So where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
You can find me on all social medias at MouthDork. If you have words of affirmation for our logo, you can send them to Aaron Prescott at A Cool Hand Fluke. And if you have some words of affirmation for our radical banner art and show poster, send them to Karen Charm at Karen_X-Men fan. Lisa, where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
Ooh, thank you. I am always accepting words of affirmation at Sidewalk Siren on Instagram and Twitter. If you'd like to spend more quality time with us, you can subscribe to us on Podbean, Stitcher, YouTube, Google, and Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to get exclusive, you can join our Patreon, where you'll get more content, including weekly bonus episodes.
So many interviews. We're covering Sandman issue by issue. We've done 26 issues, 26 episodes. I love it so much. We've got so much rad stuff happening over at the Patreon. But if you'd like to reach out and touch us electronically, you can email the podcast, cbccpodcast@gmail.com. You can visit our website, comicbookcouplescounseling.com, or follow us on Instagram and Twitter at CBCC Podcast.
You can give us the gift of 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to do an active service, why not write a review of the show while you're there?
Yeah.
We are fluent and receptive in all 5 love languages. It really warms our hearts and helps the pod.
So until next time, friends, keep your love tank full.
And your psychic rapport open. You are now in session with the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast. I'm Lisa Gullickson.
I'm Brad.
You didn't like my little, I was doing the little fisties?
No, I loved it. It gave me the giggles and I could not contain them clearly.
We're a little punchy because we sleepy.